Hello everyone, what's going on? I'm Gav, the Master974, back again today, and welcome to another Valve source code tutorial follow-up video. And today I'm going to be following up on another one of the first Valve source code tutorials that I did on the channel, which was about increasing the FOV limits in a Source 2013 mod. And one thing that I didn't talk about in that video, but it is an issue if you do that, is that the Skybox gets called or clipped when you look at it in a particular way. And it will either cause the Skybox texture to glitch out at the edges, or just straight up disappear, or basically look solid white or black dependent on whether or not you're in the game or in the pause menu. Now, one thing I want to say about this is that the fix is actually pretty simple, all things considered, but it's the implementation of the fix that is a bit of a problem. So I'll get to that in a minute, but first I do want to go over something that was mentioned to me by Twilight Bob, Phantom Ghost Level Design and Fluorescent Starter, which was about how to add or fix the FOV desired ConVar for Source 2013 multiplayer mods. Now, one thing I have to say is with the addition of the Team Fortress 2 code, if you actually test a Source 2013 multiplayer Team Fortress 2 mod, then you'd find out that there's actually no issues in this regard. The FOV desired ConVar is present, the slider to adjust the ConVar works, and so there isn't any issues in that regard. But for Half-Life 2 Deathmatch mods, Half-Life 2 multiplayer, then the ConVar basically doesn't exist, and the slider doesn't exist either. So basically you'd have to either increase or decrease the FOV by enabling server cheats, and that is not particularly a good thing that you want to be doing. So what I need to say as a fix for this is that you need to go to client mode hl2 mp normal.cpp, and you can copy over the ConVar definition for FOV desired from either client mode hl normal.cpp, which is in Source 2013 single player, or you can copy over the Team Fortress 2 version of FOV desired by copying it out of client mode tf.cpp. But you can change the minimum or maximum values to whatever you want. But typically the lower value would be around 75 and the higher value can be whatever you want, 120, 150, whatever you see fit. Or you can just straight up use the max FOV macro value instead. It's up to you. Now, just by adding this ConVar definition, the slider will show up now, but it won't actually do anything. Now, I'm going to be getting into what I think the problem for this is, but to get to the solution first, you actually want to go to hl2 mp gamerules.cpp, find the client settings changed function, and above the last base class : client settings changed of p player line, you want to add the following. So you want to create a const char asterisk called pszfov, which equals engine arrow get client convar value of p player arrow end index with brackets after it, and then in a set of speech marks FOV underscore desired. Then create an int called ifov, which equals a to I of pszfov. Then ifov equals clamp of ifov 70 max FOV, 70 being the lower bound that I used in the original tutorial, and max FOV being the maximum FOV that is defined for your mod. And then do phl2 player arrow set default FOV of ifov. Now, what I think the cause of the issue is for the FOV desired ConVar not working, at least without this change that I just mentioned, is that if you go to gamerules.cpp, you can actually see the client settings changed function, and basically it's the exact same of what I've outlined here. It's just that there's a check to see if that const char asterisk called pszfov is valid. I think for some reason in Source 2013 single player that's fine, but in Source 2013 multiplayer it isn't. So basically the check to see if that string is valid is, well, invalid for Source 2013 multiplayer mods, and hence the code to actually change the FOV doesn't get executed. But in Source 2013 single player mods, it's fine, apparently, and therefore it works without any issues. I don't know, but what I've outlined works. So let's get into the main meat of this video, which is what you're all here to hear me talk about. So I do need to give a thank you to the Gangcraft, Twilight Bob, and maybe even some people in DMs for reaching out and telling me about this. I don't know who, I don't remember to be honest, but I just want to say up front that this isn't exactly a new issue that's been pointed out to me recently. You can go back to Valve's official GitHub page, and back in May 2023, there was a post by Symphony who talked about a bunch of issues that was related to Source 2013 mods. Just to give a couple of examples, clients could get bricked because of the host timescale ConVar getting set to a non-numerical value. There's another ConVar SV tags that leaks key values, and the one issue that is pertinent to this situation is that large FOVs cause Skybox texture issues. Now, they do leave a link in that post which takes you to a project that they've made which supposedly fixes this issue, and it pretty much goes to a function where you can see a unique-ish string called r_draw skybox. You want to keep that in mind for later. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't get this engine hacks project made by Symphony working. The project doesn't compile for me because apparently you need an older version of Visual Studio and or you need a certain version of the C++ compiler, and if you don't have that, then you're going to get compilation issues. It could just be that I was doing something wrong, I don't know. All I can really say is I couldn't get this project to work. So if that is the case and that project doesn't work, then what else can we do? Well, we can investigate the unique-ish string, and to do that we can use a tool called Ghidra and specifically analyze the engine.dll file because, as Symphony pointed out in their post, a lot of the issues that they talked about was because of the engine code being inaccessible. So I did mention Ghidra in the past on the channel in regards to the whole the sun is leaking situation, if you remember that. But to give you a bit of a brief overview as to what Ghidra is, it is a tool that was developed by the NSA. Yep, those guys, the NSA. And it can be used for reverse engineering purposes. I think they said it's a reverse engineering framework or something to that effect. Now, one thing I have to say is that I'm not an expert with this sort of stuff. And before you get too excited, you're not going to be able to reverse engineer the engine code just from the engine.dll file that you have access to in Source 2013 single player or multiplayer. And there's a whole plethora of reasons I'm not going to get into, but just to give you a couple of reasons, C++ code is an example of code that gets compiled into, I think, assembly. So unless you have any sort of idea of how assembly code works, then you're not going to have any idea of what's going on, and therefore you can't reverse engineer anything. But something else that could be very helpful are .pdb files, which are basically debugging symbols that are generated during the compilation process that could help you when you're trying to do some analysis like this, so some of the assembly instructions actually make some sort of sense. But because we don't have any .pdb files for any of the code that is inaccessible to us, any sort of reverse engineering is not going to be very easy, let's just put it that way. And it's not like the engine code's already been leaked in the past or anything, but anyway. The point I'm talking about here is that we can use some of Ghidra's analysis tools to help us. For example, once the basic analysis functions of the engine.dll file have completed, we can search for that unique-ish string that I mentioned earlier, the one called r_draw skybox, and see what we find. Now, after doing that, you can find this function that I'll show on screen. I'll try and zoom in on the function as best I can because we don't really need to pay attention to the assembly instructions, but it does look pretty complex and resembles some form of a C++ function, just with more parameters that we can't really make much sense of. But what we can see is that there is a switch case system, so you want to keep that in mind for later, and also an if statement where we can see a tangible value, minus 0.29289. Now that specific value you want to keep in mind for later as well. Now, why am I even talking about all of this? None of this really helps, does it? But what if I told you that if statement is the key as to why the issue happens in the first place? And would you also believe me if I said that all you needed to do was to change that minus 0.29289 value to -1, and then the issue would be solved? Now, unfortunately, I couldn't actually figure out a way to make that change through Ghidra, like hex edit the value to -1, but it's not as simple as changing it to -1 because it's hexadecimal, so I don't know what to change it to, and so in that regard, that's another dead end. You wouldn't really want to be telling people to get Ghidra and then hex edit the engine.dll file to fix this issue now, would you? So to help make sense of this function that I just showed you, I will be showing some leaked engine code, even though I am very much against source code leaks or basically revealing source code that was illicitly obtained. but it is going to be relevant to the situation I'm talking about, and just to satisfy Valve, I'm only doing this for educational purposes. Hopefully that's enough to cover my ass legally, who knows. But basically, if this code were available, then this follow-up video wouldn't really exist, because all I would do is leave a comment on the original video saying there's one line of code that needs changing, so as I said, solving the issue would be trivial. But you would want to find a specific file, one called gl_warp.cpp, and if you scroll down a little bit into that file, what you will find is that there is a function called r_draw_skybox, and in that function, there is a switch case system that is specifically related to the skybox faces, and there's this if statement that contains the -0.29289 value, and this is the root of the issue. And do you want to know something? There's even a developer comment here that helps explain what's going on here. So the note says something to this effect. The normals are reversed, so looking at the face dots to 1.0, so looking away is -1.0. Reject back-facing surface on the inside of the cube to avoid binding their texture, and assuming a 90-degree FOV, looking at the face is 0 degrees, so reject at 107. So this is talking about dot product stuff. You don't really need to know too much about it, but if you want to know where the -0.29289 value comes from, well, it's actually because you're doing the dot product and you actually end up using an angle of 107.03105556 degrees to get that number. A bit specific, I know, and that's also assuming you're using normalized vectors in the first place, so let's hope that Valve actually were using normalized vectors when they were making these calculations. But yeah, all of this boils down to optimization concerns. You don't want to be, drawing the skybox texture that's behind you when you don't need to. But Valve made a critical mistake, which was assuming a 90-degree field of view. That was the maximum value that they considered, without considering that people might actually want to increase it at some point, and so they didn't account for any sort of checks to see what the current FOV would actually be. Hence, you end up with these sort of skybox issues. So yeah, all you'd need to do is change that -0.29289 value to -1, compile the code, and then the issue would be solved. So if I did this video months and months ago when I wanted to, then this is where the video would have ended. I would have said that you can't make the change, you can't fix the issue because you have to make changes to code that is inaccessible to us. Or worst case scenario, you have to hex edit the engine.dll file, and that's not really something that most people would want to do. But I had a thought recently, and by recently I mean like a few months ago, and, I just wanted to entertain it. I did a source shorts video where I talked about adding a dynamic skybox swapper feature, where you'd basically use the SV skyname ConVar to update a map's skybox material in real time, instead of needing to save and reload the current map for that change to be accommodated. Now, as it turns out, Waddles helped me make that video, in the sense that they provided some code and a guide about how to implement that code. But one of the things that they did was they used an entire file called gl_warp.cpp, which was from the engine code. Not the same file that I just told you about earlier. No, it's the exact same file. I'm just joking. So it begs the question, if you followed that guide, changed the -0.29289 value to -1, and then compiled the code, launched into a game, then would the skybox clipping issue still happen? And to be honest with you, I think the answer's no. I mean, I'm not seeing any graphical glitches here, and there absolutely would be skybox clipping when looking at the sky in this way, so in actual fact you can solve this issue. It just requires access to leaked engine code, and I'm very much against doing that just because I'm against source code leaks and I don't want Valve coming after me in any sort of legal capacity. Now you could say that is crazy, that's never going to happen, but remember, they took out Portal 64, they took out Team Fortress 2, Source 2, they could come after my ass just as easily, just saying. So yeah, everyone, that is how you fix this issue, or kind of fix the issue if you're willing to use leaked engine code to make that possible. You would just follow the source shorts video that I did in the past, and change that -0.29289 value to -1, and Bob's your uncle, as they say. All of the problems should be resolved. Now, I was going to end the video by saying that this was an example of a follow-up video where I don't actually have a positive resolution. You can let me know if you want that, because I can think of at least 1 or 2 more examples where that's going to be the case. But I don't really have anything more to say. I hope you found this video somewhat helpful, and I apologise for it being long, even though I don't really have that much to say, all things considered. I just wanted to tell a story with this video, just to say that sometimes fixes can be simple, but implementing fixes can actually be quite difficult. So, take care out there, peace out, see you later. I hope you'll check out the next follow-up video, and have a great day. Just check out the rest of the videos on the channel. Take care, guys.